Sometimes you want nothing more than to heal a wound or an impasse with somebody or a situation in your life, particularly if you care about that person, if you were really bonded to them at some point. And when you see the light and love and capacity and potential in somebody, and you fix your sight onto that, and then everything else gets in the way. All of the shadow patterns get in the way. Addictions get in the way. Bad choices get in the way. External extenuating circumstances can get in the way. You never forget that potential that you saw, but at some point you come to this understanding that it is the end and it needs to be the end. Because where your reality is headed, especially if you're co-creating with somebody that is heavily enmeshed in their shadow patterns or their wounds or any sort of toxic behavior, it's really painful. But you get to this point that you're like, we can't co-create a nightmare together. I can't do this with you. And there's something about self-love and self-respect that enables us to draw those boundaries. But depending on the person, sometimes those boundaries have to be very, very clearly spoken and very, very firm. And even then, sometimes they're not always recognized, depending on how tightly the person is clinging on to the illusion of what they believe in, because they don't see it the same way as you if they're not letting you walk away easily. And when we make these decisions and start to close doors, as a reality shifter, it can be very tempting to reopen them too quickly. Because once we expand our understanding that there are different lifelines, different manifestation potentials, and when you start driving your reality shifting vehicle, whatever that is, it's human form for a lot of my listeners at this moment, then you can, in my personal experience, you can want to tap in to some of those timelines and see if they are changing, if they are transmuting. And recently I had 2 encounters, actually 3 encounters of this, and found that the different lifelines were at different points of evolution and transmutation, but none of which I felt were ready. It's like the cake was still baking in the oven, and I could see that it was starting to rise, starting to transform from this gooey batter into this spongy deliciousness. But it was still very underdone. So we closed the doors again. One of them was mutual, 2 of them was not. And the process of transmutation is the act of taking one substrate, one reality layer, one outcome, if you will, and molding it into something else. It is actually a way that you consciously can uncouple from a lifeline, with the understanding that there's going to be another iteration, but you don't know when that iteration is coming. You don't know what form it's going to take, but you leave space for it to take this new shape. Now, the issue is, there are actually a couple of issues, but 2 of them I want to talk about in this episode. There are more than 2. There are more than a couple, but I want to emphasize these 2 because I don't see this talked about very often. The first is, this is a way that you can karmically, if you have a soul contract, or if you feel obligated to somebody in your life, and you don't want to give up on them, but you know that you need to give them time and that you need time and space. What you can do is you can set a path to transmutation. And you can do little pings here and there if you start to feel somebody's energy, or if you start to feel their presence, or that the potentials are getting a little bit closer. When you are highly in tune with your intuition, it is actually a feeling that you have inside of, maybe it's time to check that cake, see how it's going. And one issue is that you need to have a co-creator with you. And you can't force people to transmute their path. You can't force people to meet up with you in another lifeline. Everybody has free will. And their free will has to be respected. I call it not moving Granny from the farm unless she wants to go. And the reason this is so important is because people have to join you in their decision making to create a better life with you, to create a new form with you, to actually commit to being on the journey and allowing it to take this shape that is undefined, that's ambiguous, that has a question mark around it, and to actively do their part, whatever their part is. And that's for them to figure out. That's not your job. Don't give them a laundry list of all the things that they need to change and do. That's controlling it, and that's controlling them and putting a box around them. What you need to do is respect their sovereignty. It's a word that came up recently, and I've been working on a podcast for a great group. Highly recommend it. Decentralized Consciousness. Very, very advanced future thinkers, and I'm not sure when the episode is going to come out, but sovereignty is a theme that was talked about today in our asynchronous podcast episode. So respecting people's sovereignty is really, really important, and not forcing them to be on your healing journey. Your healing journey is yours alone, and theirs is theirs alone. And at certain times you might cross the barrier, the chasm, and hold hands and walk together. I don't even mean romantically. I just mean in some type of union. It could be platonic. It could be a friendship. It could be a work relationship, a family relationship. And so you might actually interlink hands and join each other on the journeys for a brief moment in time before you separate again. And this is a normal ebb and flow of what it means to have a soul contract. Separation is often a central feature to these soul contracts because people need space to work on their lessons with other people. They need space to work on themselves without your influence. But when we live in a society that dominates with rejection wounds and abandonment wounds, then these moments of separation take on an entirely different connotation than I believe is necessary. At a certain point of awakening, you see and feel these dynamics not from a wounded perspective. I used to be very wounded and didn't want anybody to take any space from me. Now I see it as a healthy dynamic when both partners can vocalize and say, I need to go learn this over here with somebody else. Or I need to do this leg of the journey on my own. I've said that to people. I got to do this one on my own. I just know I do. And when you are working with other conscious beings, you can actually simply talk like that. It doesn't have to be this all out, drag out, dramatic episode. Don't leave me. Like I used to be like that. Don't leave me. I was like, why are you so afraid to be alone? Dr. C? What's going on under your hood there? It turns out I had a lot of patterns that prevented me from feeling like I could be on my own and happy on my own. So as a result, I was always second guessing myself and hyper vigilant about people's communication patterns and their behavior. And I work with clients who, when we are doing soul contract work, we actually work on this trigger issue, because I have gotten to the place that it is beautiful on the other side, but not when you're living it. And there are strategies to overcome it if you are still triggered this way. And a lot of people are, even if they're pretending that everything is okay. Almost all my clients, when we're doing soul work, soul contract work, are triggered deeply, profoundly. And it's such an honor for those of you who are listening to have your trust and to get to walk through those triggering events with you as you are on the path of transmutation. And so when we do have that clawing demon inside that is afraid of rejection and abandonment, and when we have soul partners that need space and time, it becomes our own personal fuel to level ourselves up from the inside out, to understand deeply rooted, sometimes codependent or toxic love patterns. I call them love maps. Some of us have faulty love maps that are installed, where our idea of what love is supposed to look like and feel like and be like is really kind of warped and strange sometimes, because it is so the antithesis of unconditional love and acceptance and all the beautiful things that a love can be. It drags it into this octave frequency that can be really disconcerting sometimes. People lose their identities. People lose their semblance of self, their sanity. People lose their autonomy. And sometimes those ships start to verge on the icebergs or the rocks out in the sea. And it can be a little frightening, depending on the depths of that person's attachment to how things are supposed to be. So when you have somebody that is working with you, it's beautiful because you can actually talk through things and you feel safe, and they hold the space for you. You hold the space for them. And it helps when you have a sense of humor about it and you can kind of laugh at yourself if you need to. And likewise, when you are transitioning away from them, it's almost this, not that there aren't hard moments, but it's almost this, I understand. I feel a little disappointed by it, but I want to support your journey, and let's break our bond for the moment. Let the chasm grow between us, and we'll check back in. But when you don't have somebody that's working with you at that level, it can get really messy. But you can still actually co-create with them intentionally on the path of transmutation. But you have to lead first. And this means that depending on the person's wounds and rejection patterns, you might be the villain for a while in their story until they transcend it. And you need to make peace with that. This is just the reality. And I know we talk about reality shifting, but this is actually the reality when you're working with people that have rejection and abandonment wounds. When you walk away, I have not seen a case where you don't become the villain in their narrative for disrupting their internal peace. And actually, I still have people in my personal life that are still upset with me for walking away and taking care of my needs and my boundaries and entering into this, what I hoped for as a transmutation path. But in their minds, it was a breakup. And even though I indicated to them that I wanted this transmutation path, it's not accessible to us at this time because of their anger. One person in particular has seething anger. It's absolutely so angry with me. And as a result, cannot hear or see me. So you can lead the process of transmutation, but it doesn't mean that anybody else is going to buy into it, which is why this is one of the central barriers to transmutation, because you can't force anybody. And you can say your part, and you can say, I'm taking space, I'll check back in on you. I hope you do well on your journey. And you can do that, exactly that, but that doesn't mean that they're going to be receptive to you and that they're going to be ready to talk about anything or to see things from any other perspective except their own. And you need to accept that. And the quicker you accept that and move on, the faster you will make peace with everything. And the second core issue, which relates to the first one, is that you cannot control people's narratives about you, period. And the more you try to control their perspective, the more you try to control the image in their head, the more futile it is. And very often, the more it backfires, in my personal experience. Because you fall into this over-explaining, and then sometimes what happens, not all the time, but sometimes everything that you say will get picked apart and or cherry-picked to fit the narrative that they have running inside their minds. Like if there is a hologram of you in everybody's head who you've ever met, and you're working with anybody that has deep-seated rejection or abandonment wounds, or any sort of personality disorder, where those are to the nth degree. It's all on the spectrum, of course. That hologram is generated not at all by what you are providing it sometimes. It's actually generated from the person's perception of you, which is filtered by their own wounds. And the deeper those wounds, the more distorted that image is. And very often, I find that when you are entering into somebody's orbit and their inner circle, they are very, very keen on you. And the hologram image of you in their minds that they're carrying around is one that matches really wonderful qualities, some of which may also be distorted. This is what the putting you on a pedestal is about. And then when you start to bring up some of those wounds, what you observe is that the hologram starts to change and morph, and all of a sudden, it's unrecognizable. You don't recognize the person that they think you are as they reflect it back to you in moments of conflict or strife. And this is crazy making for a lot of people who are decent inside. Because what happens is that you're fighting a false image of you that you have no control over, that you have very little ability to actually influence and pull it back into alignment with reality. And depending on the depth of wounds of the person, this can be an impossible feat. So under these two conditions, I don't advise actively working on a transmutation path until you really feel that the person is doing the internal work and making those internal shifts. If you happen to notice this effect in your own mind, you are welcome to email me to work together, because it is solvable. sacredjourneyproductions@gmail.com.